President Trump says the U.S. will blockade the Strait of Hormuz after peace talks with Iran ended without a deal. Overnight, President Trump posted online that the U.S. will block ships entering or exiting Iranian ports starting at 10 a.m. Eastern. He also says the Navy will intercept vessels that have paid tolls to Iran. The president spoke about the blockade last night.
10 o'clock tomorrow, we have a blockade going into effect. That'll be 10 o'clock tomorrow. Other nations are working so that Iran will not be able to sell oil, and that will be very effective.
And after 21 hours of talks with Iran and Pakistan, there is no deal to permanently end the conflict. Vice President J.D. Vance led the U.S. delegation. Take a listen to what he had to say after negotiations wrapped up.
We've made very clear what our red lines are, what things we're willing to accommodate them on, and what things we're not willing to accommodate them on. And we've made that as clear as we possibly could, and they have chosen not to accept our terms.
And we've got some new CBS News polling showing that a majority of Americans feel worried about the Iran conflict. That's about 68%. Only 32% of Americans describe their feelings about the operation as safe or confident. And a majority of Americans view the state of the economy unfavorably. 63% of Americans rate the economy as bad, whereas only 32% described it as good. Let's chat with CBS News White House reporter Olivia Rinaldi, live in our D.C. bureau. Olivia, good morning. So let's start with this blockade. What are you hearing about this? And does the White House believe that they can force Iran into a deal?
Well, good morning, Michael. It's good to see you. Yes, the White House is now going into an economic stranglehold on Iran by enforcing this blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. We're expecting this to begin in roughly 3 hours, so 10 a.m. Eastern. And I do want to note that this represents a new phase of this war. So far, this war has been waged through an aerial campaign, but now it seems that U.S. Navy ships that are in the Strait of Hormuz and around it will begin interdicting ships that are coming from Iranian ports. Now, just ships that are coming from Iranian ports, but it certainly amounts to somewhat of an escalation given the fact that the U.S. Navy commanders could be confronted with this situation where they're having to potentially interdict, board these ships, or face some of those mines that we know the Iranians have laid in the Strait of Hormuz. Take a listen to what Mark Warner, the Senate leader of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, told our Margaret Brennan this weekend about what it looks like on the ground in the Strait of Hormuz.
This question about what the president's going to do with closing the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah.
The Iranians have hundreds of speedboats where they can still mine the strait or put bombs against tankers. In closing the strait, how is that going to ever bring down gas prices?
Now, as far as the deal, the White House is hoping that this adds just enough economic pressure that the Iranians feel they have to get back to the table and they have to make a deal. This also comes after 21 hours of negotiations inside Pakistan that resulted in no deal, and both sides having a bit of unease about the future. Michael?
Unease, Olivia. Earlier we mentioned that CBS News polling that's showing that Americans have a lot of unease over this war. How do Americans feel about the conflict?
Well, in one word, we can certainly say stressed, worried, and anger. That's what our polling showed us, was the majority of Americans are feeling worried about this conflict and the direction it's trending for Americans, particularly the next several months, as there really doesn't seem to be an end to this conflict in sight. What's important for Americans right now, though, really is just reopening the Strait of Hormuz. 87% of respondents told CBS News in our polling that that is the key thing for them. I do want to note that 76% said that permanently stopping Iran's nuclear programs is a top important thing for the U.S. to do in regards to what's going on inside of Iran. So notable that the Strait is first, right? And I think this will be informative because we also heard from respondents that gas prices have been a financial hardship. So clearly that is informing their opinions on the economy, their opinions on what is going on right now. We should also note how Americans view the economy. Not great. 63% of respondents said the economy is bad right now. So certainly notable and not numbers that the White House wants to see heading into the midterm season.
All right, Olivia, Rinaldi in Washington, thank you. Well, President Trump's vow to blockade the Strait of Hormuz comes after high-stakes talks between the U.S. and Iran in Pakistan over the weekend failed to produce a breakthrough. CBS News senior foreign correspondent Imtiaz Tyab has more from Pakistan's capital, Islamabad.
Well, a senior Pakistani government official has confirmed to CBS News that intense efforts are underway here in Islamabad to try to get the U.S. and Iran back to the negotiating table after this week's talks essentially broke down. Now, we have to really acknowledge just how historic those talks were. They were face-to-face talks between the Vice President, J.D. Vance, the U.S.'s special envoys, Steve Witkoff, and the President's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who sat opposite Iran's Speaker of Parliament, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, and indeed Iran's Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi. This was historic. This is the first time we've seen such high-level U.S. officials and Iranian officials in the same room talking face-to-face since 1979, since the Iranian Revolution, which led to the Islamic Republic, and of course, which has seen this relationship between Washington and Tehran deteriorate so much. We're where we are today. Now, the Pakistani officials that we've been speaking to say that they are appealing to both Washington and Tehran to come back to the table, saying that this is no longer the Islamabad talks, but the Islamabad process, that they believe that this could be a multi-meeting process which will eventually lead to some kind of meaningful deal. We've also heard from both the Iranians, we've heard from the U.S., and all of them agree that many points they have found common ground on, but what appears to be the main sticking points are, frankly, Iran's nuclear ambitions, and what exactly those ambitions are. From the U.S.'s point of view, they don't want to see any enrichment of any kind. They want to see most of Iran's nuclear material removed from the country. That, of course, is a non-starter for the Iranian leadership. The U.S. also wants Iran to agree to no longer funding its proxies around the region, including Hezbollah in Lebanon, and a number of other issues. Still, as we've been saying, although those feel like very big issues, and they are very big issues, there is a lot of common ground they found in those 21 hours of marathon talks. The question now is whether or not these two sides will meet again before the 22nd of this month, which is when this 2-week ceasefire is scheduled to expire. Back to you.
All right, Imtiaz Tyab in Islamabad, thank you. Well, the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports sends the 6-week conflict into a new high-stakes phase. It will be yet another stress test for the global energy supply and for President Trump. Tehran has warned that if military vessels enter Hormuz, the action will be considered a ceasefire violation and the ships will receive a, quote, forceful response. Retired Navy Vice Admiral Robert Murrett joins us now. He's the Deputy Director of the Syracuse University Institute for Security Policy and Law. Good morning, and thanks for joining us. I want to get a little perspective here. In practical terms, how would a naval blockade work, and is this something that the U.S. Navy is prepared for?
Yeah, Michael, they certainly are prepared for it, but the implementation and how the tactics unfold here starting in a few hours are important. A couple things I would just say at the outset. First, free and open navigation of the Straits of Hormuz is in the interest of everybody. All the people in the region and far-flung areas, just because of the fact it needs to be an open waterway. How you do the implementation is important. I mean, the statement from U.S. Central Command said that all ships coming or going from Iranian ports would be blockaded. And another point I would make relative to the tactics here, which we'll see unfold in the day ahead, you don't have to enforce a blockade of the Straits of Hormuz, in the Straits of Hormuz. And in fact, it may more likely take place in the Gulf of Oman, which has some advantages just in terms of not putting ships at risk and so forth. And a final comment, accountability of all the ships coming in and out on what has been a stranglehold on the SOH will be important as we do implementation and potentially what we call BBSS, visit, board, search, and seizure, of any vessels that are coming or going out of the Straits of Hormuz.
I'm curious about that. Do we have a sense of how effective a blockade would be in the Strait of Hormuz?
I think having a blockade is straightforward, just in terms of, the real people that make a difference here are the insurance carriers for the merchant ships, quite frankly. It's not really so much of a military decision as it is an economic one. And ships that don't have a confidence that they can get through the Straits of Hormuz without any commotion are probably not going to try to do so, which has been the case, as you know, for more than a month now because of economic concerns and the fact that only a trickle of ships have come in and out of the strait since that time, largely because of commercial concerns. But the biggest point I think is that the Iranian response to this, and whether or not this pressure which we're putting on them does cause them to change their posture or perhaps be less aggressive in terms of cutting off shipping in the SOH.
Now, we have just a little time left, but I want to ask, can we anticipate how Iran might respond to all this?
I think that's the big question. I was asked yesterday by another media outlet if we thought this was going to work. I think there are two sides to that question. The first, is it going to work from the standpoint of stopping shipping if we need to from Iranian ports? That's something the Navy can do. The second question is whether or not this pressure on the Iranian regime will cause them to relent and open up the Straits of Hormuz, which again is in everybody's interest.
All right, Robert Murrett, we appreciate your perspective.